Back Look Cinema, the podcast.
100 good deeds cannot atone for one murder. 1,000 temples or statues or sanctuaries, whether dedicated to me or to you, Hera, my wife, or to Thetis, lovely goddess of the sea, or to you, Athene, ever wise and full of care, or to Aphrodite, goddess of love. Nothing can wipe out or forgive this one contemptible act of blood. Acrisius must be punished, and his people with him. My lord Poseidon, I command you to raise the wind and the sea, destroy Argos, and to make sure no stone stands, no creature crawls, I command you to let loose the last of the Titans. Let loose the Kraken. What's up, y'all? My name is Zoe. That's spelled Z-O or Z to the O for those of you outside of the U.S. Welcome back, my friends. This is the 162nd episode of Backlook Cinema, the podcast, where we take a look back at the movies of yesteryear, especially the movies of the latter half of the last millennium. If you like what you're about to hear, then please tell your family, tell your friends, and tell that fine young man sitting on that magnificent winged horse over there. Have you ever seen the like? Such a beautiful creature. Well, go on. Tell him. I'm sure his horse won't bite you. He seems friendly enough. Well, we're back. We're going back to form. Not back on schedule, but at least back to form. And when I say back to form, what I really mean is that we are going back to covering the movies of the 70s, 80s, and 90s. And in this episode, I want to cover a movie from the 80s. And I'm glad that we are going back to form because this is our 4th anniversary show. Nothing special, just remembering that the first episode that we did was Rambo First Blood Part 2. And we published that on November 6th, 2020. And this episode will probably come out on the 6th or the 7th. So whenever you're listening to it, this is the show that marks the 4 years that we've been out here podcasting, talking about movies, going back and thinking about the movies that we loved when we were growing up back in those times, back when you could be counted on to be able to see a movie on network television where they removed all the nudity and the curse words, and only later on able to see it on cable television whenever your cousin came over and hooked you up with bootleg HBO. And then later on when DVDs became, well, not DVDs, not even DVDs, when video cassettes came into prominence and they were too expensive to buy because they were like $70 in the 1980s. The earlier cassettes were like $70. So you couldn't buy it. So you would go to the video store and you would rent the cassettes and you would watch it. I watched a lot of these old movies on cassettes, and that's how I was exposed to most of these movies. I don't think I watched this movie on cassette though. This pretty much is one of those movies that I watched on television when it was finally available on television. And, they didn't have much in the way of nudity, violence, or bad language, but whatever little bit that they had in the movie, they stripped out because you can't have that stuff on television. And this is actually the first time I've seen the unrated version. Well, not the unrated, the theatrical version of this movie, to find that, yes, there was indeed a little bit of nudity. As when the scene came on, I realized, oh yeah, I've only watched the edited version of the movie. And the movie that we're about to talk about is 1981's Clash of the Titans. And I am going to get into talking about that in the opening credits.
The truth is out there. Follow We interrupt this program for a special report by WKMU.
We will return you to your scheduled programming shortly. Can't sleep? Neither can we. And who are we? Well, I'm Sky, and she's Blue. And dial in as we explore everything from the 1,200-year-old structure, Göbekli Tepe, to UFOs, conspiracy theories, and bizarre stories from around the globe. Tune in at wkmu.podbean.com. That's wkmu.podbean.com.
This concludes our broadcast day.
Rude. Interrupted by WKMU. Lovely podcast. So, as I was saying before, being rudely interrupted by the, signal interference, I want to get into the opening credits of Clash of the Titans. So, a little bit about this movie. We can say that fearful of a prophecy that his grandson will kill him, the king of Argo, Perseus, banishes his daughter Danae and her son, his grandson, Perseus, by sealing them in a wooden chest and sending that chest out to sea, meaning for them to be killed. This sets off a chain of events that will have Zeus destroying Argo and Perseus on a path of love, destiny, and adventure, in which he will face off against monsters, witches, and a mighty titan. This movie was released June 12, 1981, produced by Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer and Charles H. Shear Productions. It grossed over $41 million in the US and Canada, and it had a budget of $15 million. Now, to look at that in today's terms, $41 million would translate to $142 million or over $142 million in today's dollars. And that $15 million budget would translate to about $52 million today. So interestingly enough, it made just enough to have a profit. It made just enough. As a matter of fact, it was enough of a profit that they considered sequels. And I'm not exactly sure how much they spent on marketing. So maybe they spent much less on marketing than what they might usually spend. But, it definitely, was fair. It had a fair box office. I'll put it that way. And I, for one, thoroughly enjoyed this movie when I finally got the chance to watch it. I don't know if I remember being excited about it when I saw the trailers. I probably was, but I was definitely like jazzed up about it when I finally got to see it. And mainly because I've always liked the stories of Greek mythology. I think I probably read a bunch of books based on or that's told stories from Greek mythology. I think, as far as my own personal knowledge, I know more about Greek mythology than I know about other mythologies or other pantheons. Like I know that more about Greek mythology than I do about Egyptian mythology or Norse mythology or even like American mythology. And I was very interested in like American mythology. You had like Pecos Bill and the Blue Ox and John Henry. I grew up on those folk tales as well. So I liked all of that, but I really like the stories of like, Zeus and Heracles and all of those characters from those traditions. So let's get into who's starring in this movie. First, let's talk about Laurence Olivier. He played Zeus, god of sky and thunder and king of the Olympian gods. You may have seen him in Sleuth, The Boys from Brazil, or Rebecca. He is a celebrated actor and much beloved from his era. This is like near the end of his reign, but I didn't know how important that he was in this movie. Like I didn't know I think I probably heard Laurence Olivier mentioned like a bunch of times when I was growing up, but I had no idea for whatever reason. I had no idea that was him playing Zeus, and he was definitely impactful in that role. And I don't think I've seen any other of his movies. I haven't seen anything that he's done other than Clash of the Titans, which is probably a shame. I should probably dig into the film archives and start looking at some of the films that he's been in. Up next is Harry Hamlin. He played Perseus, demigod, son of Zeus. And he's been in Making Love, 80 for Brady, and No Alternative. And he's mainly known for television acting. He doesn't have a whole bunch of high profile films, but I remember him from LA Law. I watched a lot of LA Law, and I know that he's been in a number of prominent TV shows, but LA Law is the only show that I remember him being on. We also have Claire Bloom. She played Hera, goddess of marriage, women and family, protector of women during childbirth, wife of Zeus, queen of the Olympian gods. You may have seen her in The Haunting from 1963, The King's Speech more recently, or Limelight from 1952. Maggie Smith played Thetis, goddess of water, a Nereid, a daughter of Nereus, and a sea nymph. You may have seen her in Oxford Park, Downton Abbey, the 2019 film, and most celebrated as a character in Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets in the Harry Potter series. And sadly, she passed away earlier this year. And she's known as being an outspoken and incredible woman. Ursula Andress played Aphrodite, goddess of love, lust, beauty, pleasure, passion, and procreation. You may have seen her in Dr. No, The Blue Max, or St. Francis Bird's Tour. Jack Willem played Poseidon, god of the sea, storms, earthquake, and, strangely enough, horses. You may have also seen Jack in Jason and the Argonauts, Patton, or Lawrence of Arabia. Susan Fleetwood played Athena, goddess of wisdom, warfare, and handicraft. You may have seen her in Young Sherlock Holmes, The Sacrifice, Heat and Dust, but she is most well known for her television roles. Judy Bowker played Andromeda. You may have seen her in Brother Sun, Sister Moon, East of Elephant Rock, or The Shooting Party, but she's also mostly known for her television roles. Burgess Meredith. He played Amon. You may have seen him in his most celebrated roles in the Rocky films. He's been in Rocky, State of Grace, and Grumpy Old Men. Cyan Phillips played Queen Cassiopeia. You may have seen her in Dune from 1984 or Goodbye, Mr. Chips. Tim Pidgeot Smith played Thallo. He's been in V for Vendetta and Quantum of Solace. And Neil McCarthy played Calibos, Lord of the Marsh. You may have seen him in Where Eagles Dare or Zulu, among other films. This movie was directed by Desmond Davis. He's also directed Girl with Green Eyes, The Uncle, Time Lost and Time Remembered, Smashing Time, a lot of time films, and A Nice Girl Like Me. It was written by Beverly Cross. She's also written Jason and the Argonauts, Sinbad and the Eye of the Tiger, Genghis Khan from 1965, and The Longships. She's really into that fantasy stuff. The music is by Lawrence Rosenthal. He's also made music for, or composed music for, Yellowneck, The Comedians, The African Elephant, Rooster Cogburn, or The Return of a Man Called Horse. And I don't usually, as a matter of fact, this is the first time and maybe the last time I'm including this category, but I wanted to do a special shout out for the visual effects, and the visual effects were by Ray Harryhausen. This was the last film that he had actually worked on, and he's inspired generations of directors and FX artists. I seen him in an interview where he said that people who are, great directors and artists would come up to him and talk about how inspired they were from his work on fantasy movies. And I also like to include him because he also has a producer credit. And basically the way this story came about, like, he was deep in the story process because he absolutely loves fantasy. You could tell by his body of work that he was impressed by fantasy his entire life and mythology. And these are the types of things that he wants to work on. So he would do sketches when they were developing Clash of the Titans, he's doing sketches for this film, and Beverly Cross wrote story notes based on his sketches. And that's how they got a lot of the story, and the scenes came together based on Harryhausen's sketches. And he's also worked on The Golden Voyage of Sinbad, Mighty Joe Young. He worked with Beverly on Jason and the Argonauts, and he also worked on 1 Million Years BC. And that's it for the opening credits. And the announcement I have, none really. Just please check out backlickcinema.com/shop. It's November. It's shopping season. So when you're checking out stuff to get, please check out backlickcinema.com/shop. And still working on that eBay shop. This is a continuing promise that it's going up. And when it goes up, it's going to be called Bazaar de Alonso. And now we're going to talk about our favorite parts. So, there are a couple of themes in this movie, I guess. It's hard for me to discern things like themes or themes of stories. I'm very thick-skulled, but I want to try to discern these things. And from this movie, Clash of the Titans, what I discern is that the themes of the movie is sin and punishment. So you have Zeus being offended by the actions of a king that worships him, and he wants to punish this king and the entire kingdom of Argos by destroying it for offering this offense. And the offense was the king of Argos is going to basically banish. I feel like they're banishing them to death, but because the king seals his daughter and her child in a wooden chest and throws the chest out to sea. The chest floats, like it doesn't sink, but he doesn't expect these people to survive. He didn't seal them in the chest with food and provisions. He sealed them in the chest with just whatever little bit of air is left in that chest. So I think that the king expected them to die, and he was doing it to honor Zeus, but Zeus didn't like that. And he sends the Kraken to punish the king and the people of Argo for this offense. And then there is the punishment that Zeus inflicts upon Calibos. Calibos was at once a normal human. Calibos in this story is the son of Theta, and he transformed Calibos into a hideous creature. And, he's like, he goes from a normal man to having horns, a tail, sharp teeth, he basically looks like the Christian devil. That's basically, except that he's not red, but that's kind of like what Calibos ends up looking like. And the effect on Calibos is interesting, or at least the visual effects that they use. When you see a full body shot of Calibos. It's stop motion. They use a stop motion model. But then when you get to the close up, it's, it's the actor Neil McCarthy in makeup. And, the very effective makeup. It's very good. So that's how they brought Calibos to life. And so Calibos is cursed and he wants to marry Andromeda, but Andromeda doesn't like him anyway, but now she really don't want to get with him because he looks bestial. And, so there's that, the sin and punishment portion of it. And it seems like there's a lot of that going around. I think they mentioned, how Medusa was punished. Medusa's also in the film. She's punished because I forgot what she did, but she offended the gods, and the gods turned her into, a hideous creature. I'm not sure if they mentioned that in this movie. I think they kind of suggested it or something like that. I'm mixing up what I already know about Medusa with what the film wants us to believe about Medusa. And there's also the hero's journey. So, it's Perseus as the hero. Perseus, is the son of Zeus. The thing about Perseus is the thing that is interesting is that Zeus likes to step out a lot, and the women, his wife, knows about this, but she's not, unlike in other stories regarding, Zeus stepping out on his wife. Hera in this movie seems content with, is content the right word? She's kind of, she doesn't complain about it, I guess. She's not overly upset that Zeus steps out. She's basically accepted that Zeus is just gonna step out on her. Zeus is going to be with other women, and she's just, that's just basically her lot in life, I guess. So you would think that she's the one going after Perseus and punishing Perseus, but she doesn't. She is basically hands off from Perseus. It's really Thetis that is giving Perseus trouble. And that is because Zeus punished her son, Calibos. So in a get back, and sort of trying to get back at Zeus, she puts Perseus in peril. She can't punish Perseus, but she can put him in peril. So when he's a child, when he's a baby and he's sent out to sea, sealed in a chest with his mother, and Zeus commands Poseidon to send the Kraken, he also commands Poseidon to rescue his son and his baby mama and set them on a peaceful island where Perseus can basically grow up in isolation. And he does. And then, when he's grown up, Thetis magically transport him from that island to civilization, essentially. I think she takes him to, the land of Joppa. She sets him down in an empty amphitheater where he runs into Ammon, played by Burgess Meredith. So Ammon basically finds this dude just suddenly appear out of nowhere in this empty amphitheater, and basically kind of raises him up and shows him around, and tries to get his footing and whatnot. And then when Zeus finds out that his son has been transported to Joppa, he commands his gods to give Perseus magical weapons so that he could at least have a fighting chance in the world that he didn't grow up in. He grew up on a deserted island. He didn't grow up in civilization. So, and that when he gets these magical weapons, that is essentially the beginning of his hero's journey. It reminds me of the movie Hercules that I did in an earlier show, and in the Disney animated Hercules. So in that movie, Hercules comes across, I think his name is Phil, and Phil trains Hercules so that Hercules can fulfill his destiny. But Perseus runs into Ammon, but Ammon doesn't actually offer any training. He offers to show Perseus around, but he doesn't give Perseus any training. So I think that what makes Perseus a demigod is that he instinctively knows how to fight. He instinctively knows how to do, cause you don't see him training or anything when he's on that island, and he doesn't do it when he gets to civilization. So he magically knows how to fight. And I guess when you're a kid, you just don't question. You just accept that heroes know how to fight. But looking at it as an adult, you figure that he should have had some training and has not had any training. So he has a magic shield that, actually, I don't know what the shield allows him to talk to Zeus for a moment. Like when he first gets the shield, he sees a reflection of Zeus, and Zeus tells him, that these are weapons for you that you can use, but it doesn't have any, I can't remember any particularly magical properties that the shield has, but, the sword that he gets, can cut through anything. And then he has a helmet that makes him invisible. And, there are minor differences as to, like, in actual Greek mythology, he gets in actual mythology, he was supposed to get winged feet from Hermes, but they wanted to use something different in this movie. So, so he gets something, a different magical items. So anyways, on his hero journeys, he faces the type of obstacles that heroes faced on their journeys. And that is, I guess that's one of the themes of the movie. I can't, like, I'm racking my brain, and like I've told you, I'm a little bit thick-headed on themes and such. So I can't think of any other real theme that this movie might offer, except that mythology is fun. I think that's one of the themes. I'll go with that. Now, before I begin telling you my favorite parts, I do want to mention that in spite of this film being called Clash of the Titans, this movie does not actually have any Titans in it. At least not any Titans that are identified by Greek mythology. So it wants to identify the Kraken as a Titan, but the Krakens are not Titans. And they don't even, in Greek mythology, they don't even have creatures called Kraken. And they identify Medusa as a Titan, but Medusa in actual Greek mythology is not a Titan. And if you're wondering, the Titans preceded the Olympian gods. Before the Olympian gods, there were 12 Titans: Oceanus and Thetis, Hyperion and Thea, Ceos and Phoebe, Kronos and Rhea, Mnemosyne and Themis, and Crius and Iapetus. I'm sure I pronounced some of them wrong, but you get the idea. So, as I mentioned before, in the movie, the Titans were the Kraken, and the Kraken is not a creature that appears in Greek mythology, and Medusa was never actually considered a Titan, so there's that. Going over some of my favorite parts, I mentioned earlier that Perseus doesn't get the winged shoes or the winged sandals that's in the actual mythology. So what they did is that they replaced the winged shoes with Pegasus, the winged horse. So that was a big part of the plot. And they had they changed the mythology significantly in this film. So, and I think it's because, Harryhausen probably wanted Perseus riding Pegasus. He really wanted a guy riding a winged horse, and it makes a striking visual in the movie. It's very well done. It looks really good. It's exciting, and it's more impactful, I think, than having a guy fly around on winged sandals. But it's different than the actual mythology in that Pegasus actually comes from Medusa's blood. So when Medusa is slain in the mythology, from the blood of Medusa comes Pegasus and a giant chrysaor. I don't know what that is. Maybe it's a a giant scorpion. In the movie, they do have giant scorpions come from Medusa's blood. So maybe that's what a chrysaor is. I should have looked it up. I'm not even sure if I'm pronouncing it right. It's spelled Chrysaor, and those letters don't look like they go together. It has a red underline, and I know I didn't type it. I copied and pasted that, and I'm looking at it, and it's got a red underline, and I don't know how to pronounce it. I don't know what it is. I should have looked it up. I didn't. Now it's on your head. Now you've got these words that don't make any sense in your head. I'm sorry it did that to you. I apologize in advance. But anyways, I really loved Pegasus. It was a big part of the film for me when I was growing up. It was very well done. I can't say enough about how much I love the visual effects for Pegasus. Another one of my favorite parts is, there's this whole plot device where, Calibos can't have Andromeda. Like, he wants Andromeda, but he can't really have her. He knows that he can't have her because he's cursed. But what he doesn't realize is that Andromeda didn't even really want him when he was normal. Also, Thetis is upset, like, cause she knew that Calibos was set to marry Andromeda. And now he can't because he's ugly. So what he does is that he has her, I'm trying to think of what happens. So when she sleeps, it's like her soul comes out of her body. So she astral projects outside of her body, and it's not something that she can control. So her astral form comes out of her body and goes into a waiting cage that, like, this giant vulture that works for Calibos comes to collect her soul. Her astral form, or her soul, goes into this cage. The giant vulture takes the cage to Calibos from the palace where she's sleeping. And then her astral soul leaves the cage and goes to Calibos. And Calibos is like, he's Lord of the Marsh. He has this retinue of hangers on, and he's sitting on kind of like a throne or whatever. He has his own little kingdom, and he tells her astral form a riddle. And then when the person, she has a bunch of suitors, like there are a bunch of guys that are trying to marry her, but they can't. And the reason why they can't is because he kind of set up this whole thing is that he gives her the riddle, and then her astral form goes back into the cage. The bird takes the cage back to the palace. She gets out of the cage and she reconnects with her body. And then she gets up the next day, and the palace is ready for this. It's like every day the city is prepared for a wedding, because the next guy, he'll go up to Andromeda, and then Andromeda she will say the riddle that was given to her the previous night while she was asleep. She'll say it like she's in a trance. So she'll say this riddle, and the guy is supposed to get the answer. And if he can't get the answer, then the guy is, I think, burned at the stake or something like that. Like, it's a terrible fate. They die terribly. She doesn't want to do this. And I don't know how Calibos has basically tricked the palace into thinking that these guys have to answer this riddle in order to marry this woman that will not marry him. And I think it was kind of set up by Theta, because the city that they're in is basically Theta City. They worship Theta. They got temples to Theta. These are Theta's people. So Thetis set it up so that nobody can marry Andromeda unless they answer this riddle. So they, every night this happens. So every night the city gets ready for Andromeda to get married. Every night the city is prepared for a wedding, and the suitor will go up. He'll, attempt to answer the riddle. He'll get it wrong. He's burnt at the stake. And and it's not that this is my favorite part, but what I find fascinating about it is that when Perseus enters the picture, he uses the helmet of an invisibility to follow Andromeda's astral form to Calibos, because he doesn't know what Calibos is. So he goes invisible, and he notices that she gets up and she walks to the cage. So he finds Pegasus. So the next time that she does it, he flies behind the bird, finds out that where she goes, and then while invisible goes into Calibos's court, and he sees this whole thing where he's giving her the riddle, and he sees the answer to the riddle. So the next day, you know, him being slick, what happens is Calibos notices that the footprints that an invisible man is leaving in his because he has like a palace, but it's in the marsh. It's out in the open air. It's not like he has like a domicile or anything. Apparently he just sleeps out in the open. So he sees these footprints in the mud, and he attacks Perseus, and Perseus is able to get away. And the next day, when Andromeda drops this riddle, Perseus volunteers to go answer the riddle. And then when you get the riddle, it is so convoluted. Like, how can anybody ever get this riddle? Like, it'd be impossible. Like, she says the riddle. I can't repeat it because I don't remember what it is. But the answer to the riddle is the ring that's on Calibos's finger. Like, how is anybody supposed to know? Because nobody has seen Calibos. He doesn't like pal around with everybody. He doesn't hang out with regular people. He just hangs out in his little cave. And he only comes once in a while to try to see Andromeda, I guess. But he stays in his cave. He doesn't associate with people. So nobody would really know about this ring that he wears. But that is supposed to be the answer to the riddle. And the reason why Perseus knows the answer, not only because he was there when the riddle was being given, but in his struggle to get away from Calibos, he cuts off Calibos's hand. And so when he shows up at the court, he says, "It's a ring like this." And he holds up the severed hand of Calibos, still wearing the ring. So that was fun. That's one of my favorite parts. My favorite part is the idea of the convoluted riddle. Like, nobody can marry Andromeda until they answer the riddle. And if they get the riddle wrong, then they are burned at the stake. So one of my favorite things about this movie is that you have this creature just giving out riddles that cannot possibly be answered because he's that petty. I just find that there's something about that is fascinating. An unanswerable riddle. Although I would say that I would have appreciated it more if it was a riddle that could be answered. Like, you know, the classical riddles that you normally hear in stories like this, where there is an answer and that if you just think about it, you can figure it out. I remember they did these things in Batman, the animated series. Whenever the Riddler was the villain, they had some very interesting riddles. And I would have appreciated that more if they did that in Clash of the Titans. But they didn't do that. They just had an unanswerable riddle. And it's delightful and disappointing simultaneously. Another one of my favorite parts is Hera. So none of the goddesses they're there and they have significant parts, but they don't necessarily act like their mythology counterpart. Like, the characters that they're based on are not like the characters in this film, except maybe for Athena. So Athena is the goddess of wisdom, and she herself is very bright. You normally see her with an owl, and an owl is her pet, and it's also a symbol of wisdom. She has this owl. It's a living owl. I forgot. It looks like a snow owl. I don't know owls. I don't know species of owls, but she has a living owl that she carries around all the time. And it's her favorite thing in the world. And it's called Bubo. And Zeus said one time, he commands his gods to give Perseus an advantage. One of the things that he gets is a magic shield that I mentioned earlier. And at one point he loses the shield. I'm sorry. I'm getting all confused. He loses the helmet. It was a helmet that made him invisible. So the helmet was given to him by Athena, and Zeus commands Athena to replace the helmet that he lost. And he says that, maybe you should send your owl. Give him your owl. It's my wish. It's my command. And Athena was like, no. She doesn't tell him no to his face because she knows better. But it's more to her owl. She's like, I'm never going to give you up. Bubo, that's crazy talk. So she goes to Hephaestus and she convinces Hephaestus to make a mechanical owl. And the mechanical owl is also called Bubo. And that's what she sends down to Apollo. She's not sending her owl. That's crazy talk. But she will get Hephaestus to make a mechanical owl or a clockwork owl. It's what's that called? Steamwork. It's except it doesn't run on steam, but it looks like a steampunk owl. And they send this steampunk owl to Perseus, and it talks in bleeps and blops. It sounds like R2-D2, and that was on purpose. And just like in Star Wars, like in Star Wars, it seems like everybody can understand R2, like 3PO can understand R2, and apparently Luke can I think Luke understands certain words, like enough words, in R2 to communicate, but he's not totally fluent in, R2's language. R2's language is binary. So, and I believe this because there is a time when Luke is flying in his X-Wing and there's a computer translating R2's language so that he can read it. But I'm getting too much in the woods of Star Wars. Anyways, in the movie, only Perseus can understand Bubo, and this is through magic, and nobody else, to everybody else, it's just a bunch of bloops and bleeps. But there is at one point, Amon apparently understands Bubo, or maybe he's just answering in the affirmative to the noises that Bubo makes. But, the movie breaks its own rules or is inconsistent, at this point, at the understanding Bubo, the owl. At any rate, I like that part. I liked that Hera said hell no to Zeus and sends a mechanical owl instead of her owl. I think of, actually, I don't want to say of all the goddesses that she has the most agency because Thetis, am I saying her name wrong again? Thetis is actually showing a lot of agency she doesn't defy Zeus, but she messes with his kid. She does that. So she's catty and petty in that way. So my next favorite part is, I think everybody's favorite part. It's like it's the part of the movie that is most like the mythology that it's drawing from. So this is drawing from the Perseus myth, and one of the main things that Perseus does is that he has a battle with Medusa the Gorgon. And this is the thing that is depicted in the movie, and this is what it's most like in the movie. So just like in the actual mythology, Perseus has a shield that is so shiny that he can use it as a mirror. And he uses that to, in the stories, he just uses the shield to walk backwards so that he doesn't have to look at Medusa directly. He can look at her reflection, and her reflection won't hurt him. But in the movie, he kind of just walks in, even though he tells his soldiers to walk with their, that they can use their shields as mirrors. They don't walk in backwards, which would be the most logical thing to do, because you could just walk forward and just run up on Medusa and be turned to stone. Medusa has one of the best designs for Medusa. It's like, it'll inspire legions of artists for generations to come. It's just an outstanding design. It's like the lower half of her body is a rattlesnake, and they intentionally made it a rattlesnake, which is an inspired design. And the upper half is that of a woman. So she's kind of like a mermaid design, except instead of a fish lower half, it's a snake's lower half. And I think they used this design in God of War. I'm 90% sure that's the design that they use. The other thing about Medusa is that besides her power is that when she looks upon you, she turns you into stone. She has a bow and arrow in this movie, which is awesome. It's like, she's not going to wait for you to look in her direction. She's taking pot shots at you with her bow and arrow, which is fantastic. It really ratchets it up to tension in this movie. Also, obviously, there's the snakes in her hair that, Ray Harryhausen, meticulously, had to, animate, in stop motion, step by step. I think this is the only movie that he actually had a crew on. Like this was a humongous project and he had to have a lot of help. But, his Medusa animation was like, the design and animation of Medusa is a piece de resistance, as they say. It's fantastic. And then the whole sequence is great. I really like that. The tension that was ratcheted up. It's Perseus and a couple. Here's a funny thing. So, Perseus has a crew of soldiers. It's like on their way to having to get Medusa. He has Andromeda in tow. And not because he wants to bring her along on this adventure, but she's a princess and she insists on going along. And then also he has Amon, his faithful, it's not even a trainer, is guide. Amon is his guide, more like a tour guide than anything else. But Amon has taken a shine to Perseus and wants to hang around. And then there's, Thallo. Thallo is like he's the first guy that he befriends when he gets into the main city. And so Thallo kind of hangs around Perseus, like it's one of his boys. Like Perseus needs soldiers to help him. So Thallos volunteers and he brings a couple of his men. What's interesting is that when they decide to go into the cave where Medusa is, Thallo was supposed to be like the most skilled fighter, but he leaves Thallo outside of the cave to watch over Bubo. And he brings Thallo's subordinate instead. So he has these two subordinate soldiers and himself, and they're going to track down and kill Medusa in this cave. And I thought that was funny was because these guys are going to die. It. They're saving Thallos for later. They don't want to kill Thallos right away. They want to. So it's like, okay, they're going to kill these two soldiers because they're going to leave the main guy outside. He's the main guy because he's the only one that has a name. He has a name in this movie. The other soldiers, they don't have names. They don't have backstories. We don't know about them. We don't know about their family. We don't know any, so we know they're going to die. So Perseus goes into this cave with these unnamed soldiers. And just like clockwork, they happen upon Medusa and I don't know how careful they're being, but they look at Medusa and they're turned to stone. The both of them. So now it's just Perseus trying to fight off Medusa, and he's pulling out all the stops and trying to locate Medusa without looking for her with his own eyes. At first he tries to use his mirror so that he can catch her reflection while he's hiding behind a pillar, but she has the bow and arrow and she shoots the shield out of his hand. So now he don't even have that. So now really all he has is his sword and her constant rattling, because she has the lower half of a rattlesnake with the rattle. And that is how he eventually finds her. She doesn't know exactly where he is. And when she gets close enough, he basically takes a blind swing and he actually is able to connect with her neck and chops her head clean off. And, you know, that's acceptable. I like it. It's a pretty fine moment. It's just it was a good fight. It was a great scene. It's one of my favorite scenes in the movie. And I think a lot of people connect with this movie through this suspenseful sequence. The thought that you got to face an enemy that you're not allowed to look at, that that you're fighting, but the one advantage that you have against this opponent is the ability to look at them, and that's taken away from you. And now you got to fight blindly. That's pretty good. I didn't mention that, after he successfully cuts her head off, and this is more like an extension of that fight. He gets out of the cave and he has her head in a sack so that nobody can look at it, because obviously if you look at her, it'll turn you to stone. So he has her head in a sack. And, he comes out the cave triumphant, but after her body is decapitated, it spits out a bunch of blood. It looks like her neck regurgitates. It's not just spilling blood, it's regurgitating. And it's like, it's not even really blood, but it's goo. But at the same time, actually, the funny thing is that I had mentioned earlier that after she's killed, some monsters come from her blood, but it doesn't come from the blood from her body. Somehow, some way, Calibos is able to follow Perseus and find Perseus where, track them down to where Medusa was. And he and his men ambush Perseus and their men. And in the act, they defeat Calibos, but during that time, he stabs the bag where, that holds Medusa's head during the fight. Or was it during the fight, or was it the night before? Something like that. I know in all the commotion with the foolishness of Calibos, he stabs the bag and blood trickles down and the blood becomes giant scorpions and they have to fight giant scorpions. So, that's a fun sequence. But the question is, how did Calibos get to this island? Because in order for Perseus to get to where Medusa is, he has to go through a lot. They kind of stepped away from the mythology a little bit, because apparently they put Medusa in hell. And I don't know how I have my suspicions. So I suspect that Harryhausen wanted to animate a skeletal figure. He wanted to, so there's the ferryman for the gateway to hell, or Hades, I should say. So to get to Hades, you have to cross the river Styx. And in order to cross the river Styx, you got to find Chiron, and Chiron is the boatmaster. And so Harryhausen wanted to animate Chiron as like a robed skeleton. You got to give Chiron some money, and then he'll take you across the river Styx, and then you can enter the world of Hades. What I'm saying is you got to do a lot to get to where they put Medusa in this movie. But the problem is, the issue is like, how did Calibos know all of this? Because he didn't know where. Maybe he already knew where Medusa was. But did he know that Perseus needed to find Medusa? I don't think he knew that. It's weird how he just kind of shows up and causes problems for Perseus and his men. I think they, probably one of the criticisms that I would have for this movie is that they needed to make clear how Calibos knew where Perseus was going to be at in order to ambush Perseus, because it's not clear. It just seems like he's just there and he attacks Perseus. But anyways, perhaps that's a nitpick for this type of movie. But anyway, he gets defeated, and Perseus triumphantly takes the Medusa's head. And a lot happens in this movie. The reason that he needs Medusa's head, because it's the only thing that can defeat the Kraken. He had to go to some witches to find out the Kraken's weakness. And the reason they call this movie Clash of the Titans, because in the movie they identify Medusa as a Titan and they identify the Kraken as a Titan. And Perseus is going to use Medusa to defeat the Kraken. The reason he has to fight the Kraken is because Thetis, am I saying her name right? Thetis. I've said her name a number of times on this show, and I guess I've never been sure if I've been saying it right, even though I watched the movie. So anyway, I'm going to go with Thetis. Thetis, remember, is the mother of Caligos, and she wants to punish. Oh, here's what happened. Okay, I'm remembering now. I had forgotten about this part. She wanted to punish the people that worship her because when Perseus guesses the riddle and he's allowed to marry Andromeda, they have this huge wedding ceremony, and you have Cassiopeia is Andromeda's mother, and she's giving this like glorious speech and how glorious the day it is, and her daughter can finally get married, and then she makes a mistake of saying something like, and my daughter is more beautiful than Thetis, and that sets Thetis off. It was like, you blasphemer, how dare you say that your daughter is prettier than me? And then she sets an ultimatum. She says, you will, they're supposed to do something by a certain time or something. I can't remember, but she gives them an ultimatum that if they didn't do something by a certain time, then she's supposed to sacrifice her daughter to the Kraken. So that's why Perseus goes off on this adventure to get Medusa's head. First to find out how to defeat the Kraken. And so he has to go to the witches, and then the witches tell him about Medusa. Then they had to go find Medusa, and he defeats Medusa, and then he has to take the head. Now he has to go to the Kraken. There was a point where his horse Pegasus was captured. So one of the things he had to do was rescue Pegasus. There's a lot going on. So at the end of the movie, he's on a Pegasus that he's been able to rescue, and he has Medusa's head, and he's flying around. And also Bilbo is flying around, but trying to annoy the Kraken. The Kraken is a gigantic creature because the Kraken appears, and he's going to take Andromeda as his sacrifice. But now you have this mechanical owl that's buzzing about him, and then Perseus coming around and also buzzing about him. And finally, Perseus is able to reach it. There's a point where Medusa gets knocked out of his hand. And so he has to, or the bag that carries Medusa's head get knocked out of his hand. So he has to go down to where, and try to get Medusa out of the sea while also being menaced by the Kraken. And he's finally able to get the bag that has Medusa's head and yanks the Medusa out of the bag and points it at the Kraken and triumphantly and turns the Kraken into stone. So a lot happens. and the Kraken turns to stone, and Zeus gives a speech about how at some point mankind won't need them anymore or something other. And the movie is over, and I guess everybody lives happily ever after. But it was a good fight. It was a nice little adventure that was had in this movie. And the Kraken itself was marvelous. It was marvelous. It was a fantastic design. It was like a marvelous creature. It's exactly, the Kraken is exactly what this movie needed. So it was a delight to see. So although there were many parts in this movie that I really enjoyed, those were some of my favorite. What were some of your favorite parts of Clash of the Titans? Why don't you write in, send me a note on the socials, or you can email me. I'll let you know what my email is at the end of the show, but let me know what you thought of, or you can leave a comment on YouTube, but just let me know what you thought of Clash of the Titans. What were some of your favorite parts? And now we're going to talk about the trivia. So I got my top 10 trivia here. The trivia that I got from IMDb. So the first bit of trivia I have is that despite being listed on a poster as having main title billing, Ursula Andress only has one line in the entire film. So Ursula Andress played Aphrodite, and it's like, while she's beautiful and all, I was trying to figure out, why she was chosen to play Aphrodite, goddess of love. And what I found in my research is that she is known for, being the sexy actress, right? The one that's, in a bikini or in a nude scene. She's one of those actresses. It's like and I think that, I guess people were fascinated about her. She's one of the Bond girls. I don't know if she was one of the good Bond girls or one of the bad Bond girls, but she was one of the original Bond girls in Dr. No. So people see her and they lust after her. So who better to get someone that men will lust after than Ursula Andress as Aphrodite? Up next, the original script called for Perseus to cut off Medusa's head simply by throwing his shield at her in an attempt to appease the UK standards and practice censors, as the producers felt that the hero decapitating someone would not be appropriate for children in the audience. Harry Hamlin apparently was resistant to the idea from the beginning, as it wasn't in keeping with the actual Greek mythology. When the day came to film the scene and it still hadn't been changed, Hamlin threatened to quit the movie and fly home. He remained in his trailer, much to the annoyance of producers Charles H. Shear and Ray Harryhausen. I think I mentioned that he also had producer credit. And the director, Desmond Davis. Hamlin was gradually able to get some of the other crew members on his side, which resulted in the scene being rewritten accordingly, which I thought was better for the film. I think I would have been disappointed if all he had to do was throw his shield at Medusa and her head came off. I don't know, maybe if he threw his shield like Captain America and decapitated her that way, but I think the problem was the decapitation. I think what they wanted to do was have him bash her with his shield, and apparently that was supposed to be enough to kill her. But what was he going to do? Was he going to drag her body around, like her entire body? Or maybe they would have a scene where he would cut off her head off scene, like they wouldn't actually show him doing the actual cutting, but I think that would have been less effective. So I hate to say that actors misbehaving is a way to get a movie done correctly, but it's because this is what is happening. I'm not trying to advocate for that. I don't think that an actor should take the attitude of not leaving their trailer. I think that's a little too extreme. But I'm not an actor, and I'm not a director, and I'm not a producer, so I'm not exactly sure what the most appropriate behavior is. But I guess we have Harry Hamlin to thank for his quiet disobedience. I forgot, there was another word for it. Civil disobedience. That's what he did. Harry Hamlin engaged in civil disobedience in order to give us the scene that we deserved, where the hero uses his sword to cut off the opponent's head. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. Anyway, so Laurence Olivier was so ill during the making of the film that he would go on and lean on his tall, burly co-star, Pat Roach, who played Hephaestus. And he said Let me draw some of your strength, dear boy. All right, that's my best impression. It's probably all wrong. But essentially, Sir Lawrence used Pat as to lean on because he was so ill. That is one of the things about this movie, is that Laurence Olivier was very ill during production, but you would not notice it from his performance. It was great. He gave it his all, and his all was just enough. According to Harry Hamlin, prior to choosing to do this movie, he was considering doing another project with Richard Burton, a movie adaptation of the story of Tristan and Isolde. And that became Love Spell from 1981. He ultimately gravitated towards what became this movie, despite not knowing anything about it, for the opportunity to work with Laurence Olivier, the one actor he considered even greater in stature than Burton. Calibos, Lord of the Marsh and son of Thetis, does not appear in Greek mythology. He is based on Caliban, an antagonist William Shakespeare created in 1611 for The Tempest. In Greek mythology, the son of Thetis was Achilles, Greece's best warrior in the fight against Troy. I think I kind of touched on this before. Also, Thetis wasn't, well, whether or not she was a goddess is kind of gooey. Like, she could, I think that in some stories, Thetis is considered a goddess, and in others, she's a water nymph. And in the stories that I have been exposed to, I've always seen her as a water nymph. I've never seen her identified as a goddess. And if she is identified as a goddess, then she's a lesser goddess, certainly not one of the Olympians. Well, I guess not. I guess I don't know for sure because I haven't seen her identified as a goddess. But I'm saying all of this to say that the movie isn't wrong for calling her goddess of the sea. It isn't wrong. They're technically correct, but they are wrong in creating an entirely different character to play her son. And especially when her son is supposed to be Achilles. But if they ever made like a sequel to this movie, because I think they did plan on making a sequel, and it would have been like a different story. Would they have given Thetis Achilles as a son? Maybe they would have done it. So on to the next piece of trivia. The sea monster seen at the start of the movie that destroys the city of Argos, was the Kraken, was derived from Norwegian mythology and is their name for a giant squid sea monster. In Greek mythology, the sea monster that threatened Andromedas's people was a satyr. A satyr is in reference to any giant sea monster in Greek myths and is where we get the word cetacean. Up next, Greek hellhounds traditionally had 3 heads. Dioscolos in this movie has only 2 because it would have taken Ray Harryhausen too much time to animate a 3rd head. And I had kind of touched on this before. And what I touched on was that they didn't actually call it Hades. They didn't say exactly the name. I don't remember them saying exactly the place where Medusa was living. So Perseus had to go to where Medusa was living. So she had to Perseus had to cross the river Styx. So apparently she is in Hades. And there's a giant 2-headed dog that's guarding the area where Perseus lands. So they have to defeat this. I can't remember. I think there's only one. I can't remember how many of these 2-headed dogs they had to fight. Well, I can only remember the one, but there are other things that they have to fight. But anyway, the presence of the 2-headed dog kind of signals that Medusa is in Hades. So It's like the two-headed dog, the river Styx, the Chiron, all this points to Hades. So that's what I'm thinking about. And I think that Harryhausen just wanted to, he wanted that imagery in the movie. He imagined the whole Chiron and river Styx and the hellhounds. I think that these are things that he wanted to work on. Up next, in an attempt to cash in on the success of Kenner's Star Wars toys, Mattel produced Clash of the Titan toys in 1981. The toys released were Perseus, Thallo, Calibos, Chiron, Pegasus, and the Kraken. I remember the commercial for the Clash of the Titan toys, and I remember wanting all of these things, especially the Kraken, because the Kraken was a giant toy. It was like the Godzilla toy. And of course you want the Kraken. I didn't get any of these toys. Bubo, the mechanical owl of Athena, was introduced to capitalize on the popularity of R2-D2 from Star Wars Episode 4, A New Hope from 1977. At the time, in 1977, it was just known as Star Wars. And the other thing I would say is that if they wanted to sell toys, why didn't they make a life-size version of the Bubo toy? That would have been fantastic. They weren't thinking hard enough about how to sell to kids. It's a failure on their part. The name Bubo is a scientific term for the genus of eagle owls and horned owls, which is interesting because the robot Bubo was modeled on a barn owl, which is the genus Tyto, and thus not a Bubo at all. Bubo also made a cameo appearance in Clash of the Titans in 2010. That was my Google Home voice assistant just breaking into the podcast for no apparent reason. Anyway, she won't shut up. And I'm almost done with the trivia, so hopefully she won't say anything else. So before Harry Hamlin was considered for the role of Perseus, other runners-up were Malcolm McDowell, Michael York, and Richard Chamberlain. Arnold Schwarzenegger, who was fairly unknown at the time, was briefly considered, but producer Charles H. Schneer felt that with the exception of Hercules, Greek heroes were athletic, but not overly muscular, relying more on cunning than strength. He also felt that casting a very muscular actor was a cliche harkening back to the Italian sword and sandal movies of the 1950s and 60s. So that's it for the top 10 trivia that I found on IMDb. And up next, we're going to find out what the critics thought. So the critics gave it a 63%. The audience score is at 70% on Rotten Tomatoes. IMDb Reviews has it at 6.9 out of 10. So yeah, there's some symmetry with IMDb and Rotten Tomatoes. All of us young children, when we grew up, started rating this movie because we enjoyed them. Joanne Retz from the Charlotte Observer wrote, Clash of the Titans is more fun than the 50s fur, forbidden fruit, and fin flick has any right to be. Harryhausen's stop-motion menagerie is unflaggingly engaging. Derek Malcolm of The Guardian wrote, Children of all ages will come out happy enough. I would imagine dingy color, a pretty rotten script, and the 2-hour length were my main complaints, but it was fun while 3/4 of it lasted. I can understand that sentiment. I don't agree, but I understand. Adrian Turner from Radio Times wrote, Ray Harryhausen's stop-motion effects were wonderfully wobblesome as ever, and comes up with some memorable monsters, notably the petrifying Gorgon Medusa. And that is something I think we can all agree on. And David Nusser from Real Film Reviews wrote, a camp-infused fantasy flick that will probably work best among younger viewers and those with fond memories of its original theatrical release. And I believe that is a fair assessment. Finally, Clash of the Titans is, as of this recording, available on streaming. That's it for today. Now, I'm in the mood for some really good drama. We haven't had any on the show in a long time, and I want to get serious for a moment and take a look at a film that I really enjoyed. Join me next week for a movie starring Kurt Russell, Ray Liotta, and Madeline Stowe in Unlawful Entry. That even sounds dramatic. You can follow us on Twitter, TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, and Threads. Please contact us with any questions, comments, or suggestions at fanmail@backlookcinema.com. Please rate and review on your favorite podcast app. And if you're listening on YouTube, please like or subscribe or leave a comment. I love to hear from you. One last time, if you like this show, then please help us grow by spreading the word about Backlook Cinema, the podcast. Believe me, it matters. I've been Zoe Richardson. Be safe, share a movie from yesteryear with your family, hug your loved ones, and if you're gonna be anything, be outstanding.